The courtroom felt heavy that morning in downtown Chicago. Marcus Johnson sat at the defendant's table wearing his best suit, but the fabric could not hide the strength in his shoulders or the steady way he held himself. His dark skin showed old scars that spoke of battles fought far from home. Next to him sat his lawyer, Peter Cole, who kept shuffling papers and looking worried. Behind them in the gallery, his wife, Lisa Johnson, gripped her purse tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Officer Jake Morrison stood at the witness stand telling his story for the third time. He was a big man with pale skin and small eyes that never seemed to look directly at Marcus. His uniform was clean and pressed, but something about the way he wore it made it look wrong. Morrison claimed that Marcus had attacked him outside Murphy's bar 3 weeks ago. He said Marcus was drunk and angry and threw the first punch. He said he had no choice but to defend himself. Marcus knew it was all lies. He had been at Murphy's bar that night, but only for one beer with his old friend Danny Kim, who was in town for 2 days. Marcus never drank much because his body was a weapon and weapons needed to stay sharp. He had been walking to his car when Morrison and his partner Rod Cooper showed up. They had seen Marcus through the window and decided to have some fun with what Morrison called a troublemaker. Morrison had started with words. He called Marcus names that made Lisa cover her ears when she heard about it later. When Marcus tried to walk away, Morrison grabbed his arm. When Marcus asked him to let go, Morrison shoved him hard against his car. When Marcus straightened up, Morrison hit him with his baton. Only then did Marcus fight back, and only enough to get away. But Morrison's partner backed up Morrison's story, and the security camera outside the bar had been broken for months. Judge Helen Brooks looked bored as Morrison talked. She was an older woman with gray hair pulled back tight and glasses that made her eyes look small. She had been a judge for 20 years, and Marcus could tell she had already made up her mind. She looked at Marcus like he was something dirty that had been tracked into her clean courtroom. The prosecutor was a thin man named Kevin Ross, who spoke in a voice that cut through the air like a knife. He pointed at Marcus and talked about dangerous criminals who thought they could do whatever they wanted. He said Marcus was a trained killer who used his military skills to hurt innocent police officers. He never mentioned that Marcus had served his country for 8 years. He never mentioned the medals Marcus had earned or the lives Marcus had saved. When it was Peter Cole's turn, he tried his best. He talked about Marcus's service record and his clean criminal history. He pointed out the holes in Morrison's story and the convenient way the security camera had been broken. But Marcus could see it was not working. Judge Brooks kept checking her watch, and the jury looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. During the lunch break, Morrison walked past Marcus's table. Marcus was sitting alone because Peter had gone to make phone calls and Lisa had gone to the bathroom. Morrison stopped right next to Marcus's chair and looked down at him with a smile that made Marcus's skin crawl. Morrison said quietly, so only Marcus could hear, that this was what happened to people who did not know their place. He said Marcus should have stayed in whatever hole he crawled out of instead of trying to act like he belonged in the real world. He said when this was over, Marcus would be in prison where he belonged, and Morrison would make sure everyone there knew Marcus was a cop killer. Marcus did not respond. His military training had taught him when to fight and when to wait. He kept his hands flat on the table and his breathing steady. Morrison seemed disappointed that he could not get a reaction. He started to walk away, but then turned back. What happened next seemed to happen in slow motion. Morrison lifted his foot and kicked Marcus hard in the shin under the table. The sound was loud enough that several people in the courtroom turned to look. Marcus's leg jerked from the impact, but he did not cry out. He just looked up at Morrison with eyes that had seen things Morrison could not imagine. Morrison stumbled backward and put his hand to his chest, like he was having trouble breathing. He said loudly that Marcus had tried to grab him. He said Marcus was violent and dangerous and proved everything Morrison had been saying about him. Judge Brooks banged her gavel and told everyone to calm down. Peter Cole rushed back into the courtroom just as Morrison was finishing his performance. Lisa came running from the bathroom when she heard the commotion. She saw her husband sitting calmly in his chair while Morrison pointed at him and shouted about being attacked. Judge Brooks looked at Marcus with disgust. She said his behavior was exactly what she expected from someone like him. She said it proved that Morrison's story was true, and that Marcus was clearly a violent criminal who could not control himself even in a courtroom. Marcus finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. He said he had not touched Morrison. He said Morrison had kicked him, and everyone in the courtroom had heard it. He said he was willing to submit to any medical examination to prove he had not moved from his chair. Morrison laughed and said Marcus was a liar who would say anything to get out of trouble. Judge Brooks said she had seen enough violence for one day and ordered Marcus to be taken into custody immediately. She said the trial would continue the next morning and Marcus would spend the night in jail to think about his actions. The bailiff, Bill Watson, came over to put handcuffs on Marcus. Watson was a decent man who had been doing this job for 10 years, and he could tell something was not right. But he had orders and he followed them. As he clicked the handcuffs shut, he whispered to Marcus that he was sorry. Marcus stood up slowly and looked around the courtroom one last time. His eyes found Lisa, who was crying now. He nodded to her once to let her know he was okay. Then he looked at Morrison, who was still smiling. Marcus's expression did not change, but something in his eyes made Morrison's smile fade. As they led Marcus away, he was already planning his next move. He had been trained for situations like this. He knew how to wait and how to think and how to turn a bad situation into an opportunity. Morrison thought he had won, but Marcus knew the game was just beginning. In his cell that evening, Marcus was given his one phone call. Most people would call their lawyer or their family. Marcus had something else in mind. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. A number that could change everything. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Marcus stood in the small jail cell holding the old black phone that hung on the wall. The guard named Tony Miller had given him 10 minutes and was standing outside the cell door trying not to listen, but Marcus knew he was curious about who a man like Marcus would call. The voice that answered was crisp and professional. It belonged to a woman who sounded like she was used to taking important calls. She said simply that this was Admiral Wright and asked who was calling. Marcus could hear the background noise of a busy command center with people talking and machines beeping. Marcus spoke clearly but quietly. He said Sierra Tango 7 requesting immediate extraction protocol Delta. Then he waited. There was silence on the other end of the line for so long that Marcus thought the call might have been disconnected. Finally, Admiral Wright spoke again, but her voice was completely different now. She asked Marcus to repeat his identification code. Marcus said it again, adding his service number and the date of his last mission briefing. Admiral Wright asked him to hold the line, and Marcus heard her talking to someone else, but her hand was over the phone so he could not make out the words. Admiral Susan Wright was sitting in her command chair aboard the USN Starforge, which was humanity's most advanced space station. It orbited Jupiter like a small moon, but it was made of metal and glass and weapons instead of rock and ice. From her position, she could see the gas giant's great red spot swirling like an angry eye. The Starforge was home to 15,000 people who worked around the clock to keep Earth safe from threats that most humans did not even know existed. Wright was 50 years old and had been in space for most of her adult life. She had short gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore the dark blue uniform of the Earth Space Navy with 3 stars on her collar. Those stars meant she was one of only 12 people in the solar system who knew about the Terran Shield program. When Marcus had given his code, Wright felt her stomach drop. Sierra Tango 7 was Marcus Johnson, and he was supposed to be dead. His mission to the Tau Ceti system had gone dark 6 months ago, and they had received no word since then. The mission had been classified at the highest levels because if it failed, Earth would have no warning of what was coming. Wright turned to her aide, Commander Frank Lopez, who was standing nearby reading reports on a tablet. She told him to clear the bridge of everyone except essential personnel and to activate Security Protocol 7. Lopez had worked with Wright for 3 years, and he knew that tone meant something very serious was happening. As people filed out of the bridge, Wright put the phone back to her ear. She asked Marcus where he was and what his status was. Marcus told her he was in a jail cell in Chicago facing assault charges. He said his cover had held, but he was running out of time. He said the package was secure but degrading, and he needed immediate medical attention. Wright understood what he meant by package. Marcus was carrying intelligence that could save or doom humanity. The degrading part meant his body was breaking down from whatever they had done to him to get that intelligence out of enemy territory. She asked him how long he could hold on. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He could feel the thing in his head getting worse every day. The alien technology they had used to download the information was slowly killing him. But he had to stay alive long enough to deliver it. He told Wright he had maybe a week before system failure. Wright was already moving. She told Lopez to contact Director Gray at the Terran Defense Initiative immediately. She told him to prepare a full extraction team and to get clearance from the Pentagon for an emergency operation on American soil. She told him they were going to need the best lawyers money could buy, and probably the president himself before this was over. Marcus heard the urgency in her voice and felt relief for the first time in months. Someone finally knew he was alive and they were coming for him. He told Wright about Officer Morrison and Judge Brooks. He said they thought they were dealing with just another criminal, but they had no idea what they were interfering with. Wright asked Marcus if he could maintain his cover for another 12 hours. Marcus said he would do whatever was necessary. She told him help was coming and to trust no one until he saw federal identification. She said the code word would be Starlight, and he should not go with anyone who did not use it. As Marcus hung up the phone, he felt the weight of his mission settling back on his shoulders. He had volunteered for the Tau Ceti mission because someone had to go and he was the best qualified. He had known it was probably a one-way trip, but he had gone anyway because that was what soldiers did. They protected people who could not protect themselves. The mission had been simple in concept but terrifying in reality. Strange signals had been detected coming from the Tau Ceti system. They were clearly artificial and they were getting stronger. Earth's best scientists said they showed signs of advanced technology, beyond anything humans had ever built. The signals stopped suddenly, and that was even more frightening than when they had been broadcasting. Marcus and his team had taken the fastest ship humanity had ever built and traveled 11 light years to see what was out there. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. An alien species called the Vortani had built a massive fleet and they were preparing to invade Earth. The signals had been their final preparations before departure. Marcus's team had managed to infiltrate one of their command ships and download their invasion plans. They learned that the Vortani had been watching Earth for decades. They knew about human technology and military capabilities. They thought humans were primitive and weak. They planned to arrive in overwhelming force and crush any resistance before it could organize. The download had required Marcus to interface directly with Vortani technology. It had burned pathways into his brain that were never meant to exist in human neural tissue. The pain had been unimaginable, but he had held on long enough to get the complete battle plans. Then his team had fought their way out and raced back to Earth. Their ship had been damaged in the escape and they had barely made it to the solar system. His teammates Carlos Martinez and Amy Chen had died when their life support failed 3 days out from Earth. Marcus had made it home alone with the most important intelligence in human history slowly killing him from the inside. He had been debriefed by Admiral Wright and Director Gray in a secret facility on the moon. They had tried to extract the information, but Vortani technology was too alien for human computers to interface with safely. Marcus would have to stay alive and conscious to transfer the data when Earth's defense forces were ready to receive it. They had given him a new identity and a cover story. He was supposed to lay low and wait for contact. But Morrison had decided to make trouble for a black man who looked like he might fight back. Morrison had no way of knowing that his racist power trip was about to interfere with the most important military operation in human history. Guard Tony Miller came back to tell Marcus his time was up. Marcus thanked him and walked back to his cell. He lay down on the narrow bunk and closed his eyes. Somewhere above the Earth, Admiral Wright was mobilizing forces that Morrison could not imagine. Help was coming, but Marcus had to survive long enough to receive it. He thought about Lisa and how scared she must be. She knew he had been in the military, but she thought he had been a regular soldier doing regular things. She had no idea that her husband had traveled to another star system and back. She had no idea that he was carrying information that would determine whether humanity lived or died. Marcus fell asleep thinking about the Vortani fleet that was already on its way to Earth. They would arrive in less than 3 weeks, expecting to find a helpless planet full of primitive creatures. Instead, they were going to find humans ready and waiting. That is if Marcus could stay alive long enough to deliver what he knew. 6 months earlier, Marcus Johnson had been standing on the observation deck of Luna Base watching Earth rise over the lunar horizon. The planet looked peaceful from here, like a blue and white marble floating in the black of space. It was hard to believe that somewhere out there among the stars something was planning to destroy it. Director Nathan Gray stood beside him looking at the same view. Gray was a thin man with dark hair and the kind of eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore a simple black suit that made him look like a government accountant, but Marcus knew better. Gray was in charge of humanity's most secret defense program, and he had the authority to do whatever it took to protect Earth. Gray told Marcus that the signals from Tau Ceti had stopped broadcasting 3 days ago. The sudden silence was more frightening than the signals themselves had been. Whatever was out there had finished preparing and was probably already on the move. Earth's telescopes could not see across 11 light years with enough detail to know what was coming, but they could make educated guesses, and none of them were good. Marcus had volunteered for this mission because he was the best qualified person humanity had. He was a Navy SEAL with advanced training in alien technology research. He had spent 2 years studying at the secret facility on Mars, learning everything scientists knew about potential alien contact scenarios. He could pilot experimental spacecraft, and he could survive in environments that would kill most people. More importantly, he was willing to go. The mission to Tau Ceti was almost certainly one way. The fastest ship humanity had ever built could make the journey in 4 months if everything went perfectly. But perfect was not something anyone expected when dealing with unknown alien technology and hostile intentions. Marcus's team consisted of 3 people, including himself. Carlos Martinez was a fellow SEAL who specialized in electronic warfare and computer systems. Amy Chen was a civilian scientist who had designed most of Earth's alien contact protocols. Together, they represented humanity's best hope of finding out what was coming, and maybe doing something about it. Their ship was called the USS Pioneer, and it was a miracle of human engineering. It used an experimental fusion drive that could accelerate to 15% of light speed. The hull was made of materials that had been developed from asteroid mining operations, and it could survive impacts that would destroy any previous spacecraft. Most importantly, it was equipped with stealth technology that made it nearly invisible to conventional sensors. The journey to Tau Ceti had taken 3 months and 18 days. Marcus spent most of that time in cryogenic sleep, but he woke up every few weeks to check their progress and monitor ship systems. During those brief waking periods, he studied everything humanity knew about the signals they were investigating and tried to prepare for whatever they might find. What they found when they arrived was beyond anything they had imagined. The Tau Ceti system contained 6 planets, but only one of them mattered. The 4th planet from the star was completely covered in artificial structures, cities that stretched across entire continents connected by transport networks that moved faster than sound. Orbital platforms that could house millions of beings surrounded the planet like a metal shell. But it was the ships that made Marcus's blood run cold. Hundreds of massive vessels hung in space around the planet. Each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built, and they were clearly designed for war. Weapon systems covered their hulls like scales on a dragon. Engine arrays that could push them across interstellar space glowed with energy that made the Pioneer's fusion drive look like a candle. The beings that built all this called themselves the Vortani. Marcus's team watched them from a safe distance using the Pioneer's advanced sensors. The Vortani were roughly humanoid but larger and stronger than humans. Their skin was gray and their eyes were black. They moved with purpose and discipline that suggested a highly organized military society. Marcus knew they had to get closer to learn more. The Pioneer's stealth systems could hide them from passive sensors, but getting close enough to gather real intelligence would be dangerous. They needed to know the Vortani's plans and capabilities if Earth was going to have any chance of defending itself. Carlos had managed to intercept some of their communications. The Vortani used quantum encryption that was centuries ahead of human technology. But Carlos was brilliant, and he had been working on alien cryptography for years. He could not translate their language, but he could identify key patterns and command structures. What he found was terrifying. The Vortani had been monitoring Earth for decades. They knew about human technology and military capabilities in detail. They had cataloged Earth's resources and population centers. They had planned their invasion down to the smallest detail, and they were confident of victory. Amy determined that the Vortani had been preparing to leave Tau Ceti for weeks. Their ships were being loaded with supplies and weapons. Their crews were being assembled and briefed. According to her calculations, they would depart within days and arrive at Earth in approximately 6 months. Marcus made the decision that changed everything. They could return to Earth immediately and warn everyone, but that would only give humanity 6 months to prepare for a war they could not win, or they could try to gather more detailed intelligence and maybe find a way to give Earth a real chance. He chose to stay, and gather intelligence. The Pioneer moved closer to the Vortani fleet using minimal power and maximum stealth. They drifted like a piece of space debris, watching and learning. Marcus felt like a mouse studying cats, but he knew this might be humanity's only chance to understand their enemy. The opportunity came when one of the Vortani command ships separated from the main fleet. It was conducting what appeared to be final systems checks before departure. The ship was isolated and its crew was focused on internal operations. Marcus decided to board it. Getting aboard the alien ship was the most dangerous thing Marcus had ever done. He used a small stealth pod to approach the command ship's hull. Vortani technology was advanced, but their security systems were designed to detect large threats, not single infiltrators. Marcus found an access port and used tools that Amy had designed to interface with alien systems. Inside the ship, Marcus found himself in a maze of corridors and chambers that were built for beings larger than humans. The gravity was heavier than Earth normal, and the atmosphere burned his lungs even through his environmental suit. But he pressed on because he knew what was at stake. The ship's computer core was in a heavily shielded chamber at the center of the vessel. Marcus had to disable several security systems and avoid patrols of Vortani guards to reach it. When he finally found it, he saw technology that was beyond his understanding. Crystalline structures that pulsed with energy and interfaces that responded to thought rather than touch. Amy had given him a special device that could interface with alien computer systems. It was experimental and untested, but it was their only hope of accessing Vortani data. Marcus connected the device to the computer core and felt it establish a link with the alien systems. What happened next was like having lightning shot directly into his brain. The Vortani used neural interfaces that were designed for their physiology, not human biology. The download process tore pathways through Marcus's mind that should not have existed. He could feel the alien technology burning channels into his consciousness as it forced information into storage areas of his brain. The pain was unimaginable, but Marcus held on. He knew that the intelligence he was gathering could save Earth. Fleet positions and capabilities, command structures and communication protocols, tactical doctrines and strategic objectives, all of it poured into his mind like molten metal. When the download was complete, Marcus barely had enough strength left to disconnect the device and escape. He stumbled through the alien ship's corridors as his vision blurred and his coordination failed. Behind him, alarms were starting to sound as the Vortani discovered that their systems had been compromised. Carlos and Amy had the Pioneer ready for immediate departure when Marcus made it back to his stealth pod. They accelerated away from the Vortani fleet at maximum power, hoping that speed would save them where stealth had failed. Behind them, the entire alien armada was mobilizing to hunt down the intruders. The chase lasted for 3 days. Vortani pursuit ships were faster than the Pioneer, but Marcus's team knew how to use asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies to their advantage. They jumped from hiding place to hiding place while Marcus fought to stay conscious as the alien technology in his brain slowly killed him. They finally escaped when they reached the edge of the Tau Ceti system. The Vortani ships turned back rather than pursue them into interstellar space. Marcus's team set course for Earth knowing they carried information that could determine the fate of humanity. Admiral Wright moved faster than she had in years. Her command center aboard the Starforge became a hive of activity as she activated protocols that most of her crew had never seen before. Commander Lopez was sending encrypted messages to Earth at light speed while teams of technicians prepared equipment that had been waiting in storage for exactly this kind of emergency on Earth. Director Gray was already in motion before Wright's message reached him. He had been waiting for word from Marcus Johnson for 6 months, and when it finally came, he was ready. The Terran Defense Initiative had been planning for this moment since the day Marcus had volunteered for the Tau Ceti mission. Now it was time to execute. Gray's first call was to General Patricia Lopez, who commanded Earth's orbital defense forces. His second call was to the President, who had been briefed on the Terran Shield program when she took office. His third call was to the Attorney General, who would need to clear the legal obstacles that were about to be swept aside like leaves in a hurricane. The black vehicles began moving toward Chicago 30 minutes after Marcus made his phone call. They carried federal agents who had been briefed on only the essential details. They knew they were extracting a deep cover operative who was carrying critical intelligence. They knew local law enforcement was not to be trusted. They knew failure was not an option. Judge Helen Brooks was having dinner at her favorite restaurant when the call came. The voice on the phone identified itself as Deputy Attorney General Karen White and told Brooks that she needed to return to her courthouse immediately. Brooks tried to argue, but White explained that this was a matter of national security and Brooks would comply or be removed from the case permanently. Officer Morrison was at home watching television when someone knocked on his door. He opened it to find two men in dark suits who showed him federal identification. They told him he was needed for questioning in a matter involving national security. Morrison tried to protest, but the agents made it clear that he could come with them voluntarily or in handcuffs. Back in his jail cell, Marcus felt the alien technology in his brain getting worse. The neural pathways that the Vortani download had burned into his mind were breaking down and taking healthy brain tissue with them. He could feel his memories becoming confused and his motor control starting to fail. He needed medical attention soon, or the intelligence he carried would die with him. Guard Tony Miller came to Marcus's cell at 11 p.m. and told him he had visitors. Marcus knew it was too early for the federal extraction team, but he went with Miller anyway. In the visitor room, he found Peter Cole and Lisa Johnson looking worried and confused. Lisa had been crying and her eyes were red. She asked Marcus what kind of trouble he was really in because strange things were happening. Federal agents had been asking questions about him at their apartment building. Military vehicles had been seen in the neighborhood. Someone had contacted the newspaper and told them to expect a big story tomorrow. Marcus wanted to tell her the truth, but he could not. His cover identity was still important because if the Vortani had agents on Earth, they would be watching for any sign that their invasion plans had been discovered. He told Lisa that everything would be explained soon and she needed to trust him a little longer. Peter Cole had been contacted by lawyers he had never heard of who claimed to be taking over Marcus's case. They had credentials from the Justice Department and authorization from the federal court system. They told Cole that his services would no longer be needed, and he should not discuss the case with anyone including the media. At midnight, the extraction team reached the courthouse. They consisted of 12 federal agents led by Agent Director Susan Hayes, who had 20 years of experience in sensitive operations. Hayes had been briefed on Marcus's true identity and the importance of his mission. She knew that the man in the jail cell might be the only thing standing between Earth and extinction. The agents entered the courthouse through multiple entrances simultaneously. They had electronic keys for every door and override codes for every security system. The building's few night shift employees were shown federal warrants and told to remain at their posts, but not to interfere with federal operations. Sheriff Deputy Paul Wright was on duty at the jail when the agents arrived. He had been warned by his supervisor that federal agents might be coming, but he was still surprised by how many there were and how seriously they took their job. Hayes showed him paperwork that transferred custody of Marcus Johnson to federal authorities immediately. Marcus was awake when they came for him. He had been meditating and trying to keep the alien technology in his brain stable for a few more hours. When Agent Hayes said the code word Starlight, Marcus felt relief flood through his body. Help had finally arrived. Hayes told Marcus that Admiral Wright had sent her and that medical teams were standing by. She said they would be transported to a secure facility where Earth's best doctors would try to save his life and extract the intelligence he carried. Marcus nodded and allowed them to escort him from his cell. As they left the courthouse, Marcus saw that the entire building was surrounded by federal vehicles. Agents in tactical gear stood at every entrance, and snipers were positioned on nearby rooftops. This was not a simple prisoner transfer, this was a military operation disguised as law enforcement activity. The convoy that carried Marcus away from Chicago consisted of 6 armored vehicles with air support from helicopters that flew without lights. They took a route that had been planned to avoid populated areas and potential ambush sites. Marcus rode in the center vehicle with Hayes and a military doctor, who monitored his vital signs. Officer Morrison spent that night in a federal holding facility, wondering what he had gotten himself into. He had been questioned for hours by agents who seemed to know everything about his career and his personal life. They asked him detailed questions about his encounter with Marcus Johnson and why he had felt the need to assault a man who was sitting quietly in a courtroom. Morrison realized that Marcus was not just some random criminal when the agents started asking about his contacts with foreign governments and whether he had been paid to interfere with Marcus's case. The questions made no sense to Morrison, who had simply been exercising what he thought was his right to abuse someone who could not fight back. Judge Brooks discovered that her judicial authority had been suspended, pending a federal investigation into her handling of Marcus's case. The Attorney General himself had signed the order removing her from all cases involving national security. Brooks was told that her future on the bench depended on her cooperation with federal investigators. By dawn, Marcus was in a medical facility that officially did not exist. It was built into a mountain in Colorado, and it housed some of Earth's most advanced medical technology. Doctors who had been studying alien physiology for years examined Marcus and tried to understand what the Vortani technology had done to his brain. The lead doctor was Helen Martinez, who had spent her career preparing for exactly this kind of case. She had studied theoretical alien biology and developed procedures for treating humans who had been exposed to non-terrestrial technology. She had never expected to actually use that knowledge, but she was ready. Martinez found that the alien technology had created a secondary neural network in Marcus's brain. This network contained the downloaded intelligence, but it was incompatible with human physiology. The longer it remained active, the more damage it would cause to Marcus's original brain functions. The extraction procedure would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee that Marcus would survive it. But if they did nothing, he would certainly die within days, and the intelligence would die with him. Martinez explained the risks to Marcus, who told her to proceed. He had not come this far to fail now. Admiral Wright arrived at the facility as the medical team was preparing for surgery. She had traveled from Jupiter aboard the fastest ship in the fleet, and she brought with her the equipment that would be needed to decode the Vortani intelligence once it was extracted from Marcus's brain. Wright found Marcus in the pre-operation area looking pale but determined. She told him that his mission had succeeded beyond all expectations. The intelligence he carried would give Earth the advantage it needed to defeat the Vortani invasion. His sacrifice would save billions of lives. Marcus smiled and told Wright that he was proud to serve. He said he hoped the information would be worth what it had cost. Wright assured him that it would be, and that his name would be remembered long after the Vortani were defeated. As they wheeled Marcus into surgery, Wright realized that everything now depended on the skill of the medical team and the resilience of one brave man who had traveled farther than any human in history to bring back hope for his species. The surgery lasted 14 hours. Dr. Martinez and her team worked with instruments that had never been used on a living human before. They had to extract alien technology from Marcus's brain without destroying the intelligence it contained or killing the man who carried it. Every minute that passed brought them closer to either salvation or disaster. Marcus remained conscious during most of the procedure because the alien neural network could only be safely accessed while his brain was active. He felt every probe and every adjustment as the doctors carefully mapped the pathways that the Vortani technology had burned into his mind. The pain was incredible, but he endured it because he knew what was at stake. Admiral Wright stood in the observation room watching the surgery and coordinating Earth's response to the intelligence that was slowly being extracted. Every piece of data that came out of Marcus's brain was immediately analyzed by teams of military experts and scientists. What they found changed everything humanity thought it knew about the coming invasion. The Vortani fleet was larger than Earth's worst-case estimates. 200 massive warships carrying weapons that could crack planets and armies that could overwhelm any defense. But size was not their greatest advantage. The Vortani had been studying humanity for decades, and they knew exactly how humans would respond to invasion. They expected Earth's forces to concentrate around the planet itself, trying to create a defensive barrier. They planned to use that predictable response against humanity by striking at Earth's orbital installations first, and then methodically destroying the defensive fleet piece by piece. It was a sound strategy that had worked for them against dozens of other species. But Marcus had given Earth something the Vortani did not expect: complete knowledge of their battle plans and ship capabilities. Admiral Wright could see immediately how to turn that intelligence into victory. Instead of playing defense, Earth would strike first and strike hard at targets the Vortani thought were safe. General Patricia Lopez arrived at the medical facility as the surgery was entering its final phase. She commanded Earth's space defense forces, and she had been waiting for this intelligence for months. Lopez was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had been fighting humanity's enemies since before most people knew those enemies existed. Lopez reviewed the tactical data as it came out of Marcus's brain and began formulating attack plans immediately. The Vortani fleet would arrive in 3 weeks expecting to find Earth unprepared and defenseless. Instead, they would find humanity's most powerful warships waiting in ambush at carefully chosen locations throughout the solar system. The intelligence revealed critical weaknesses in Vortani technology that human scientists had never suspected. Their shields were powerful, but they operated on frequencies that could be disrupted by modified human weapons. Their command and control systems relied on quantum entanglement, networks that could be jammed by equipment Earth already possessed. Most importantly, Marcus had learned the identity and location of the Vortani fleet commander. Admiral Korth was a veteran of 50 interstellar conquests, and he commanded from the flagship destroyer, which was the largest and most powerful ship in the alien fleet. If Earth could eliminate Korth early in the battle, the entire Vortani command structure would collapse into chaos. Dr. Martinez finally announced that the extraction was complete. Marcus had survived the surgery, and the alien neural network had been successfully transferred to Earth's most advanced quantum computers. The intelligence was intact and ready for analysis. Marcus was weak and would need months of recovery, but he was alive and his mind was his own again. Admiral Wright was the first person Marcus saw when he woke up in the recovery room. She told him that the surgery had been a complete success, and that the intelligence he carried had exceeded all expectations. Earth now had everything it needed to defeat the Vortani invasion, and Marcus was the hero who had made it possible. Marcus asked about his wife Lisa and whether she was safe. Wright told him that Lisa had been moved to a secure location and would be reunited with him as soon as doctors cleared him for visitors. She also told him that his cover story was no longer necessary. The world would soon know who Marcus Johnson really was and what he had done for humanity. The intelligence extraction revealed that the Vortani had been monitoring Earth's communications for decades. They knew about human military capabilities and had planned their invasion accordingly. But they did not know about humanity's secret space forces or the advanced weapons that had been developed in hidden facilities throughout the solar system. Earth's real military strength had been carefully concealed from alien observation. While the Vortani were studying humanity's public military forces, they had missed the secret bases on Mars and Europa. They had not detected the stealth ships that patrolled the outer solar system or the orbital weapons platforms that hung invisible in space around Earth. General Lopez began mobilizing these hidden forces immediately. Orders went out to commanders who had been waiting years for this moment. Ships that had never been publicly acknowledged powered up their engines and began moving to intercept positions. Weapons that existed only in classified files were loaded and prepared for battle. The centerpiece of Earth's defense would be the USS Defiance, which was humanity's newest and most powerful battlecruiser. The ship had been built in secret at a facility hidden in the asteroid belt, and it incorporated technology that was decades ahead of anything the public knew existed. Admiral Wright would command the Defiance personally, and Marcus would serve as her intelligence officer. Marcus insisted on joining the battle despite his injuries. He argued that no one else understood Vortani tactics and psychology as well as he did. His first-hand experience of their technology and methods would be crucial in the coming fight. Dr. Martinez cleared him for limited duty against her better judgment. The intelligence also revealed something that chilled everyone who read it. Earth was not the Vortani's first target. They had conquered 47 other worlds before setting their sights on humanity. Each conquest had followed the same pattern: overwhelming force followed by systematic extermination of the native population and strip mining of planetary resources. The Vortani did not take prisoners, and they did not negotiate. They saw other species as insects to be eliminated when they became inconvenient. Earth's choice was simple: fight and possibly win, or surrender and definitely die. There was no middle ground and no possibility of peaceful coexistence. Marcus's intelligence included detailed files on the species the Vortani had already destroyed. Advanced civilizations with millions of years of history, reduced to lifeless rocks in a matter of weeks. The Vortani were efficient killers who had perfected the art of interstellar genocide. They expected humanity to be just another easy conquest. But humanity had advantages that previous Vortani victims had lacked. Humans were naturally aggressive and had been fighting wars for their entire history. They were innovative and could adapt quickly to new situations. Most importantly, They were united in a way that most species never achieved until it was too late. The revelation that Earth faced extinction had an unexpected effect on human society. Instead of panic, there was determination. Instead of despair, there was anger. The knowledge that aliens planned to murder every man, woman, and child on Earth triggered a response that the Vortani had not anticipated. Humans did not surrender when faced with extinction. They fought harder. Within hours of the intelligence being declassified, every major government on Earth had pledged total support for the defense effort. Resources that had been tied up in petty conflicts were redirected to building weapons and ships. Factories that had made consumer goods retooled to produce military equipment. The entire planet became a single war machine focused on one goal. Admiral Wright looked at the tactical displays showing Earth's mobilization and felt something she had not experienced in years: hope. The Vortani were coming with overwhelming force, but humanity was ready for them. The species that had survived ice ages and global wars would not go quietly into extinction. Marcus lay in his hospital bed studying the same displays and planning for the battle to come. He had traveled 11 light years and sacrificed his health to bring back the intelligence that would save his species. Soon he would have the chance to use that intelligence in combat against the enemies who thought humans were weak and primitive. The Vortani fleet was 18 days away from Earth. In 18 days, humanity would discover whether Marcus's sacrifice had been enough to save them all. 17 days before the Vortani arrival, Earth had transformed into something the aliens would not recognize. Every major city buzzed with activity as factories worked around the clock producing weapons and equipment. The skies filled with transport ships carrying supplies to orbital platforms that had been hidden for decades. Humanity's true military strength was finally being revealed. Marcus stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching Earth shrink behind them as the massive battlecruiser accelerated toward the outer solar system. His recovery had been faster than anyone expected, but he still felt weak from the surgery that had saved his life. Admiral Wright had insisted he wear a medical monitor that would alert the ship's doctors if his condition deteriorated. The Defiance was a marvel of human engineering that incorporated technology from across the solar system. Her hull was made from asteroid metals that could absorb energy weapons fire. Her engines used fusion technology that had been perfected in the hidden laboratories of Europa. Her weapons were based on discoveries made in the secret research facilities of Mars. Wright stood beside Marcus, looking at the tactical displays that showed the disposition of Earth's defense forces. 57 warships were moving to intercept positions throughout the solar system. Each ship was commanded by officers who had trained for this moment their entire careers. Each crew was ready to die to protect their homeworld. The plan that General Lopez had developed was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of waiting for the Vortani to attack Earth, humanity would strike first at the edge of the solar system. The alien fleet would emerge from faster-than-light travel, expecting to find empty space. Instead, they would find Earth's most powerful ships waiting in ambush. Marcus had provided the exact coordinates where the Vortani fleet would drop out of FTL Drive. The aliens used gravitational reference points to navigate, and their computers would bring them out of hyperspace near Jupiter, where they could scan the inner solar system before beginning their attack. Earth ships would be waiting for them there. The USS Defiance would lead the assault on the Vortani flagship destroyer. Marcus had studied Admiral Korth's tactical preferences and knew that the alien commander would position himself at the center of his formation, where he could coordinate the entire fleet. If Earth could eliminate Korth quickly, the alien command structure would collapse into confusion. Carlos Martinez had died during the return journey from Tau Ceti, but his sacrifice had not been in vain. The electronic warfare techniques he had developed were now installed on every Earth ship. When the battle began, humanity would jam Vortani communications and blind their sensors, while Earth's forces struck from multiple directions. Simultaneously, Amy Chen's research into alien psychology had revealed important weaknesses in Vortani military thinking. The aliens were used to fighting primitive species that could not match their technology. They had never faced an enemy that could anticipate their tactics and turn their own advantages against them. Earth would teach them what human ingenuity could accomplish. The crew of the Defiance consisted of volunteers who had been told exactly what they were facing. Every person on board knew that the Vortani had destroyed 47 other worlds and planned to do the same to Earth. They knew that failure meant the extinction of their species. They were ready to fight and die to prevent that from happening. Captain Brian Kelly commanded the Defiance under Admiral Wright's overall authority. Kelly was a veteran of the Mars colonial wars and had been fighting in space for 20 years. He knew his ship and crew better than anyone, and he had absolute confidence in their ability to carry out their mission no matter what the cost. The ship's chief engineer was Commander Lisa Park, who had designed many of the Defiance's most advanced systems. Park had worked on the secret Earth defense projects since graduating from the Naval Academy 15 years ago. She had been waiting her entire career for the chance to test her creations against a real enemy. Marcus served as the ship's intelligence officer and tactical advisor. His knowledge of Vortani capabilities and weaknesses would be crucial during the battle. He had prepared detailed briefings for every department head and had worked with the weapons officers to modify Earth's armaments for maximum effectiveness against alien targets. The battle plan called for Earth's forces to strike in 3 waves. The first wave would consist of stealth ships that would attack the Vortani fleet's outer perimeter and try to knock out their sensor arrays. The second wave would be the main battle fleet led by the Defiance attacking the enemy formation center. The third wave would be held in reserve to exploit any weaknesses that developed during the initial assault. Earth's orbital defense platforms had been moved to new positions where they could provide supporting fire during the battle. These massive weapons stations had been disguised as communication satellites and industrial facilities for decades. When the fighting began, they would reveal their true nature and add their firepower to Earth's assault. The most secret weapon in Earth's arsenal was a new type of missile that could phase through normal matter and strike targets from impossible angles. The phase missiles had been developed using principles discovered in alien technology, recovered from crashed spacecraft over the past 50 years. Marcus's intelligence had revealed exactly where to aim them for maximum effect. 16 days before the Vortani arrival, Admiral Wright received a message from General Lopez reporting that all Earth forces were in position and ready for battle. Every ship was fully armed and supplied. Every crew was trained and motivated. Every weapon system had been tested and calibrated. Humanity was as ready as it could possibly be. Marcus spent his time aboard the Defiance reviewing everything he knew about Admiral Korth and the Vortani command structure. The alien leader was proud and aggressive, but he was also experienced and intelligent. He would not make obvious mistakes that Earth could easily exploit. The battle would be won by whoever could adapt fastest to changing circumstances. The Vortani expected their invasion to follow the same pattern as their previous conquests. They would arrive in overwhelming force and destroy any resistance before it could organize effectively. They would use their superior technology to sweep aside primitive defenses and then begin the systematic extermination of Earth's population. But Marcus had given Earth the ability to disrupt that pattern. Humanity knew exactly when and where the aliens would arrive. They knew the capabilities and weaknesses of every ship in the Vortani fleet. Most importantly, they knew that the aliens expected to face a helpless enemy, not a prepared and determined defender. The psychological advantage was significant. The Vortani had never faced serious resistance from any of the species they had conquered. They were used to victory being quick and easy. When they discovered that humanity was ready to fight back, their confidence would be shaken and their coordination would suffer. Earth's crews had been training for this battle for years, even though most of them had not known what they were preparing for. They had drilled endlessly on combat scenarios that seemed impossibly difficult. Now they would discover that their training had been designed specifically to prepare them for fighting the Vortani. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as the hours counted down to battle. He had traveled farther than any human in history to gather the intelligence that made Earth's defense possible. Soon he would discover whether his sacrifice had been enough to save his species from extinction. Admiral Wright found him standing alone in the observation lounge looking out at the stars. She told him that whatever happened in the coming battle, he had already done more for humanity than anyone had a right to ask. He had given Earth a chance to survive, and that was all anyone could do. Marcus replied that giving Earth a chance was not enough. He wanted to give them victory. He wanted to see the Vortani fleet destroyed and Earth safe for future generations. He wanted his journey to Tau Ceti to mean something more than just a temporary delay of the inevitable. Wright smiled and told him that she had no doubt Earth would be victorious. Humanity had always been at its best when facing impossible odds. The Vortani were about to learn what happened when they threatened a species that had fought its way up from caves to reach the stars. 14 days before the Vortani arrival, the USS Defiance reached its assigned position near Jupiter. Around them, the rest of Earth's fleet settled into ambush positions and waited for their enemies to arrive. The battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. The Vortani fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel exactly where Marcus had predicted they would. 200 massive warships appeared in the space near Jupiter, like deadly flowers blooming in the darkness. Their hulls gleamed with alien metal and their weapons arrays pulsed with energy that could crack planets. Admiral Korth had brought enough firepower to sterilize Earth 10 times over. Marcus stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching the alien ships take formation on the tactical display. After 6 months of carrying their secrets in his damaged brain, he was finally seeing his enemies again. The Vortani vessels were just as terrifying as he remembered, but this time humanity was ready for them. Admiral Wright gave the order that humanity had been waiting to give for decades. Attack. Earth's ships dropped their stealth fields and opened fire, simultaneously from positions throughout the outer solar system. The ambush that Marcus had made possible caught the Vortani completely by surprise. The first salvo of Earth's attack targeted the Vortani sensor ships that formed the outer perimeter of their formation. Phase missiles materialized inside alien hulls and detonated with devastating effect. 6 Vortani vessels were destroyed in the opening seconds of the battle before they could raise their shields or return fire. Admiral Korth aboard the flagship destroyer reacted quickly to the surprise attack. He ordered his fleet to assume defensive formation and began launching fighters to screen his capital ships. But his communications were being jammed by Earth's electronic warfare systems, and his orders were reaching his subordinates slowly and incompletely. The USS Defiance led Earth's main battle fleet in a direct assault on the center of the Vortani formation. Captain Kelly pushed the ship's engines to maximum power as they raced toward the enemy flagship at speeds that would have been impossible with older technology. Behind them, 23 other Earth warships followed in perfect formation. Marcus coordinated the attack from his position at the tactical station. He knew exactly where Admiral Korth would position his command ship and how the alien leader would respond to different threats. Every piece of intelligence he had gathered during his mission to Tau Ceti was being used to guide Earth's weapons to their targets. The Vortani shields proved to be as powerful as Marcus had warned, but they also had the weaknesses he had discovered. Earth's modified weapons fired on frequencies that could disrupt the alien defensive systems. When the shields failed, the underlying hull armor was vulnerable to human projectile weapons that the Vortani had not expected to encounter. Admiral Korth found himself fighting a battle unlike any in his long career. The primitive humans were using tactics and weapons that should not have been possible for such a backward species. They knew his fleet's capabilities and weaknesses better than he did. Someone had given them intelligence that could only have come from inside Vortani space. The battle raged across millions of cubic kilometers as Earth's ships struck at the alien fleet from every direction. Humanity's advantage lay in mobility and surprise, while the Vortani relied on superior firepower and armor. But Marcus's intelligence allowed Earth's forces to avoid the enemy's strengths while exploiting their weaknesses. Commander Lisa Park pushed the Defiance's engines beyond their design limits as the ship maneuvered through the battle zone. Her modifications to the ship's systems allowed them to match the acceleration of smaller Vortani vessels, while maintaining the firepower of a battlecruiser. The alien ships found themselves outrun by an enemy they had expected to be slow and clumsy. The Vortani fighters launched waves of attacks against Earth's fleet, but they discovered that human point defense systems were more effective than their intelligence had suggested. Laser arrays that appeared to be primitive by alien standards proved capable of tracking and destroying incoming missiles with devastating accuracy. Marcus watched the tactical display as Earth's electronic warfare systems continued to disrupt Vortani communications and sensors. Carlos Martinez's sacrifice was paying dividends as alien ships fired on their own forces or ignored priority targets because they could not receive proper orders from their commanders. The battle reached its climax when the USS Defiance broke through the Vortani defensive screen and engaged the flagship destroyer in direct combat. The alien ship was 3 times larger than the human vessel and carried weapons that could have destroyed entire cities. But Admiral Wright had surprise and determination on her side. Captain Kelly brought the Defiance alongside the enemy flagship and launched boarding pods filled with Earth's most elite soldiers. The idea of boarding an enemy vessel during space combat was so primitive that the Vortani had no defenses against it. Human Marines armed with weapons designed specifically for fighting aliens cut their way into the heart of the enemy ship. Marcus led one of the boarding parties despite his injuries and his status as an intelligence officer. He knew the layout of Vortani ships better than anyone, and his knowledge was crucial for finding Admiral Korth's command center. The corridors of the alien vessel were filled with smoke and emergency lighting as damage from the Defiance's weapons caused systems failures. Throughout the ship, the fighting aboard the destroyer was brutal and desperate. Vortani soldiers were larger and stronger than humans, but they were not used to fighting enemies who understood their weaknesses. Marcus's team used tactics based on his observations during the infiltration mission to overcome alien advantages through superior planning and coordination. Admiral Korth made his final stand in the ship's command center surrounded by his most loyal officers. The alien leader was impressive even in defeat, standing nearly 3 meters tall with gray skin and black eyes that showed no fear. He fought with weapons that could have cut through tank armor, but human tactics and teamwork proved superior to individual strength. Marcus faced Admiral Korth in personal combat as the battle raged around them. The alien admiral was skilled and experienced, but Marcus had studied Vortani fighting techniques during his time in their space. He knew how they moved and how they thought. When Korth fell, the Vortani command structure began to collapse. With their flagship captured and their admiral dead, the Vortani fleet lost cohesion. Individual ships continued to fight, but they had no overall coordination or strategy. Earth's forces pressed their advantage and began systematically destroying alien vessels that could no longer support each other effectively. The remaining Vortani ships attempted to retreat, but Earth's pursuit vessels were faster and more maneuverable. Admiral Wright had positioned reserve forces to block the most likely escape routes, and the alien survivors found themselves trapped in the solar system with no way to flee. The battle ended 12 hours after it began with the complete destruction of the Vortani invasion fleet. Not a single alien ship escaped to carry word of their defeat back to their home system. Earth had achieved total victory against an enemy that had conquered 47 other worlds. Marcus stood on the bridge of the captured flagship destroyer looking at the wreckage of the alien fleet floating in space around Jupiter. His journey to Tau Ceti had cost him his health and nearly his life, but it had given humanity the victory they needed. The species that had threatened to exterminate Earth was itself facing extinction. Admiral Wright joined him at the observation port and told him that Earth's defense was complete. The Vortani would never threaten humanity again, and the intelligence Marcus had gathered would help Earth defend against other potential enemies. His sacrifice had saved not just his own species, but potentially countless others who might have fallen to Vortani aggression. Marcus felt the weight of his mission finally lifting from his shoulders. He had traveled farther than any human in history and fought battles that no one else could fight. He had carried secrets that could have doomed his species if they had been lost. Now Earth was safe, and humanity could look to the stars with confidence instead of fear. The battle for Earth's survival was over, but Marcus knew that humanity's journey among the stars was just beginning. The species that had once huddled in caves fearing the dark had proven themselves capable of defeating enemies from across the galaxy. The future belonged to humanity, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 months after the battle, Earth had become the center of a new galactic community that no one could have imagined before the Vortani invasion. The victory over such a powerful enemy had announced humanity's arrival on the interstellar stage in a way that could not be ignored. Species that had hidden from the Vortani for centuries were now asking to meet the humans who had accomplished the impossible. Marcus Johnson stood before the United Nations General Assembly wearing the uniform of an admiral in Earth's space Navy. The man who had been falsely accused of assault in a Chicago courtroom was now recognized As one of the greatest heroes in human history, his journey to Tau Ceti and the intelligence he had gathered there had saved not just Earth but potentially dozens of other worlds. The recovery of Marcus's health had been as remarkable as everything else about his story. The alien technology that had nearly killed him was completely gone from his brain, leaving only his own memories of what he had experienced. Earth's doctors said his healing was unprecedented, but Marcus knew that human determination could overcome almost any obstacle. Lisa Johnson sat in the gallery watching her husband address the leaders of the world. She finally knew the truth about where Marcus had been during those months when he was supposedly deployed on routine training missions. The man she had married was not just a soldier, but an explorer who had traveled to another star system to gather the intelligence that saved their species. Admiral Wright had been promoted to command all of Earth's space forces, and she reported directly to the newly formed Department of Interstellar Affairs. The woman who had once commanded a single space station now oversaw humanity's expansion into the galaxy and the integration of alien technologies recovered from the defeated Vortani fleet. The captured Vortani ships had provided Earth with technological advances that would have taken centuries to develop independently, faster than light engines that could cross the galaxy in weeks instead of months, weapon systems that could defend Earth against any conceivable threat, medical technology that could extend human life and cure diseases that had plagued the species for millennia. But the most important discovery was not technological. The Vortani database contained detailed information about hundreds of other intelligent species scattered across the galaxy. Many of them had been victims of Vortani aggression, while others had survived by hiding or by being too primitive to be worth conquering. Earth's victory had freed them all from the threat that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. First contact with these species had been carefully managed by Earth's new diplomatic corps. Humanity's reputation as the people who had defeated the Vortani opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed for decades. Species that had been isolationist for centuries were eager to establish trade and cultural relationships with Earth. The Kepler Republic was a confederation of 12 worlds that had been fighting a losing war against Vortani expansion for 50 years. When they learned that Earth had destroyed the entire invasion fleet, they immediately requested an alliance. Their technology was different from human designs, but equally advanced in some areas. The exchange of knowledge benefited both species enormously. The Centauri Collective was an ancient civilization that had retreated to heavily defended systems when the Vortani began their conquests. They possessed knowledge of galactic history that went back millions of years, and they were willing to share it with the humans who had ended the greatest threat the galaxy had known. Their libraries contained the stories of civilizations that had been lost to Vortani aggression. Even more remarkable were the Vortani themselves. The survivors of the invasion fleet had been captured rather than killed, and they had been held in secure facilities while Earth decided what to do with them. What humanity discovered was that the ordinary Vortani soldiers were not evil conquerors but victims of their own military leadership that had turned conquest into a way of life. The Vortani military caste had controlled their society for so long that most of their people had never known any other way of life. When Admiral Korth and his command structure were eliminated, the remaining Vortani found themselves free to choose their own destiny for the first time in generations. Many of them chose to work with humanity to rebuild their civilization along peaceful lines. Marcus had been instrumental in establishing communications with the Vortani prisoners. His first-hand knowledge of their culture and psychology allowed him to understand their perspective in ways that other humans could not. He discovered that many Vortani had been as much prisoners of their military system as the species they had conquered. The transformation of Vortani society became one of Marcus's primary responsibilities as Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. The Council was a new organization created to coordinate peaceful relationships between the various intelligent species of the galaxy. Earth's role in founding the Council reflected humanity's new status as a major galactic power. Officer Jake Morrison watched the news coverage of Marcus's speech from his prison cell where he was serving a 10-year sentence for interfering with a matter of planetary security. The man he had kicked in a courtroom was now one of the most important people in human history. Morrison finally understood the magnitude of his stupidity and prejudice. The irony was not lost on anyone that Morrison's racism had nearly prevented humanity from receiving the intelligence that saved their species. If Marcus had been unable to make his phone call, or if the extraction had been delayed even by a few hours, Earth might not have been ready for the Vortani invasion. One man's bigotry had almost doomed an entire planet. Judge Helen Brooks had been removed from the bench permanently and was facing federal charges for her role in the case. Her bias and incompetence had been documented in detail, and she would never be allowed to preside over legal proceedings again. The woman who had dismissed Marcus as a criminal was now a cautionary example of how prejudice could blind people to reality. The legal reforms that followed Marcus's case ensured that no similar situation could ever occur again. Federal oversight of local courts was strengthened, and new procedures were established to identify cases that might have national security implications. The justice system that had failed Marcus was rebuilt to prevent future failures. Peter Cole had become one of Earth's most sought-after lawyers after his role in defending Marcus became public knowledge. He had not known the truth about his client, but he had fought for Marcus's rights even when the odds seemed hopeless. His dedication to justice had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. Marcus's speech to the United Nations focused on the future rather than the past. He spoke about humanity's responsibility as a galactic power to protect smaller species and to prevent future wars of conquest. He outlined plans for joint exploration missions that would map unknown regions of the galaxy and search for new forms of intelligent life. The speech concluded with Marcus's vision of a galaxy where differences between species were celebrated rather than feared. He spoke of trade networks that would span thousands of light years and cultural exchanges that would enrich every civilization. He described a future where war was obsolete and cooperation was the foundation of interstellar society. The applause that followed Marcus's speech lasted for 10 minutes and was broadcast live to every human settlement in the solar system. People who had been facing extinction just months before were now citizens of a galactic civilization that offered unlimited possibilities for growth and exploration. Admiral Wright watched the speech from her office aboard the USS Defiance, which had become the flagship of Earth's expanding space navy. The ship that had led humanity's victory over the Vortani was now exploring distant star systems and making contact with species that had never seen humans before. Every mission brought new discoveries and new opportunities. The transformation of human society had been as dramatic as the changes in galactic politics. Earth's economy had been revolutionized by access to alien technologies and resources. Diseases that had killed millions were now easily curable. Energy was abundant and clean. Space travel was as common as air travel had been in the previous century. But the most important change was in how humans saw themselves and their place in the universe. The species that had once believed they were alone in the cosmos now knew they were part of a vast community of intelligent beings. Earth was no longer an isolated world, but the capital of an expanding interstellar civilization. Marcus finished his speech and looked out at the assembled delegates who represented every nation on Earth. These were the leaders who would guide humanity's expansion into the galaxy and who would determine how Earth used its new power and influence. He hoped they would prove worthy of the trust that had been placed in them. As Marcus left the podium, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had volunteered for a mission that everyone expected to be one way. He had traveled farther than any human in history and had fought battles that no one else could fight. He had carried secrets that could have doomed his species if they had been lost. The phone call he had made from a jail cell in Chicago had changed everything. It had revealed the truth about who he really was and what he had accomplished. It had exposed the prejudice